Max Verstappen was less than 7/10 away from the fastest lap, yet his radio sounded like Red Bull's entire setup had collapsed. First, he said the car felt as if the handbrake was still on. Then came rear axle locking, a front wing concern, and a seating position that left him feeling far too reclined. The timing screen showed second place in first practice and fourth in second practice, but Verstappen was exposing something far more dangerous than simple lack of speed. Red Bull had built a car that looked competitive, while its driver could no longer trust what it would do under braking. And the most shocking detail is what those complaints may reveal about the real problem hidden inside the car. Subscribe to the channel. Friday practice should have given Red Bull a clear direction. Instead, it exposed a contradiction that became more uncomfortable with every lap. Max Verstappen was second fastest in the opening session. Charles Leclerc led for Ferrari with a lap of 1 minute, 19.075 seconds. Verstappen followed with a 1 minute, 19.559. The gap was 484 thousandths of a second. On paper, that looked competitive. Red Bull appeared to be within striking distance. Verstappen was ahead of almost everyone, and the car seemed fast enough to become a serious threat once the team made a few small adjustments. But then Max spoke over the radio. He said the car felt like he was driving with the handbrake on. That one comparison changed the meaning of the entire session. A handbrake does not simply make a car slower. It makes the car feel restricted. It creates the sensation that something is fighting against every attempt to accelerate, rotate, and move freely. Imagine trying to sprint while someone holds the back of your shirt. You can still move. You may even look fast compared with everyone around you. But you know your real speed is being trapped. That was the disturbing part of Verstappen's message. He was already second, yet he felt the car was holding him back. And when one of the fastest drivers in Formula 1 says the car feels restrained, the team cannot simply point at the timing screen and call the session successful. Because the stopwatch only records the final result. It does not reveal how difficult the lap felt. It does not show how many corrections Verstappen made through the steering wheel. It does not explain whether he could brake with confidence, or whether he had to leave a small safety margin because the car was refusing to behave naturally. A driver like Verstappen can disguise problems that would be obvious with someone else behind the wheel. He can change his line in the middle of a corner. He can control the throttle more carefully. He can sense movement in the rear of the car before most drivers would even react. That ability can make a difficult car look better than it really is. And that creates a dangerous problem for Red Bull. If the lap time is strong, the engineers may believe the setup is close. But inside the cockpit, Verstappen may feel that the car is nowhere near ready. Both things can be true. The car can be fast, and the car can still be deeply uncomfortable. That distinction matters more in Hungary than at many other circuits. The Hungaroring is a tight, technical track where one corner quickly leads into the next. There are very few moments when the driver can relax, reset, and recover lost time. If the car refuses to turn properly into one corner, the driver may enter the next section from the wrong position. If he has to wait before pressing the throttle, he loses speed on the short straight that follows. If the rear feels unstable under braking, he cannot commit fully to the corner entry. One small weakness spreads through the entire lap. It is like missing the first step while running up a staircase. You may not fall, but every step after that becomes harder. That is why Verstappen's handbrake message could not be dismissed as ordinary frustration. He was describing a car that was forcing him to compromise. And compromise is exactly what a driver does not want at the Hungaroring. The car must change direction quickly. It must remain stable while braking. It must give the driver confidence to carry speed through long sequences of corners. If one part of that balance disappears, the driver begins fighting the machine instead of attacking the track. But there was another detail Red Bull had to consider. The team was not using the distinctive rear wing it had tested 1 week earlier at the Belgian Grand Prix, the design that had become known as the Macarena wing. The available information does not prove that removing this wing caused Verstappen's problem. There is no confirmed link between the two. But its absence showed that Red Bull was still adapting the car from one circuit to another, searching for the aerodynamic balance that would allow Verstappen to use its full potential. Belgium had brought him his third podium of the season. He finished third, behind the two McLaren drivers. That result created hope. It suggested Red Bull might finally be moving in the correct direction. Then the team arrived in Hungary, and Verstappen immediately described a car that felt restrained. That contrast opened a much bigger question. Was Belgium proof that Red Bull had genuinely improved the car? Or had the team simply found a temporary combination that worked at one particular circuit? True progress should travel from one track to another. It should survive different corner speeds, different wing levels, different braking demands, different tire behavior. If the improvement disappears as soon as the circuit changes, then it may not be a complete solution. It may only be a narrow setup window. And a narrow window is one of the most dangerous problems a Formula One team can face. It means the car can be competitive, but only when everything is exactly right. The correct temperature, the correct tire preparation, the correct balance, the correct amount of fuel, the correct track conditions. Miss one of those details, and the car changes. The grip disappears. The driver loses confidence. The performance falls away. That possibility made Verstappen's second place far less reassuring. Red Bull had the speed to reach the front of the timing screen. But the driver did not have the confidence to believe that speed would remain available when he pushed harder. And qualifying would demand much more than a respectable practice lap. It would demand full commitment. Verstappen would need to brake later, turn more aggressively, use every inch of the track, trust that the rear would remain stable, trust that the front would respond, trust that the car would not suddenly change its behavior when the tires reached their limit. The handbrake feeling suggested that trust was already damaged. But Red Bull still had time. The engineers could study the data after first practice. They could adjust the balance. They could examine where the car was losing rotation, where it was struggling under braking, and where Verstappen was being forced to wait before accelerating. Second practice was supposed to reveal whether those changes had worked. It was supposed to give Verstappen a car that felt freer, sharper, and more predictable. Instead, the problem became more serious. Because the next radio message did not describe a general feeling. It identified something happening under braking. And once Verstappen reported rear axle locking, Red Bull could no longer treat the morning complaint as a minor setup irritation. Second practice was supposed to calm the situation. Instead, it gave Red Bull a more dangerous problem to solve. Lewis Hamilton led the session for Ferrari with a lap of 1 minute, 18.729 seconds. Verstappen finished fourth, 692 thousandths behind. Again, the gap was not enormous. Again, the timing screen suggested Red Bull was close. And again, Verstappen's radio told a very different story. During his decisive run on the soft tire, Verstappen was only 193 thousandths behind Lando Norris. At one point, he even moved into third place provisionally before dropping to fourth by the end of the session. That should have been encouraging. But this is where the contradiction became impossible to ignore. The Red Bull had enough performance to stay near the front, yet Verstappen was reporting a car that was becoming harder to trust. At 6:51 in the evening, local time, he complained about rear axle locking in the braking zones. That sounds technical, but the feeling is simple. When Verstappen presses the brake pedal, he needs the front and rear of the car to slow down together. He needs the car to remain straight, calm, and predictable. If the rear axle begins locking, the back of the car can become unstable. It can feel light. It can begin moving before the driver wants it to move. Imagine riding a bicycle and squeezing the rear brake too sharply while turning. The rear wheel can slide. The bicycle may start rotating in a direction you never intended. Now imagine facing that same uncertainty at Formula One speed. That is why rear axle locking is not a small complaint. It attacks the driver's confidence at the most critical moment of the corner. The braking zone is where the driver decides how much risk to take. Brake too early, and the lap time disappears. Brake too late, and the car may not make the corner. Verstappen needs to find the exact point between those two outcomes. But if the rear is unpredictable, that point begins moving. One lap, the car may stay stable. The next lap, the rear may become nervous. The driver no longer knows how much he can demand. And when that certainty disappears, the entire lap changes. He brakes a little earlier. He turns in with more caution. He waits before applying the throttle. Then he reaches the next corner with less speed. One technical problem begins spreading through the lap like a crack through glass. But the rear axle message was not the first concern Verstappen reported during that session. 6 minutes earlier, at 6:45 in the evening, he had already mentioned a problem involving debris and the front wing. The exact details were not fully explained in the source. There is no confirmed evidence of a major front wing failure. But the complaint still mattered. Because it introduced another issue, in another part of the car, during the same session. The front wing helps the car turn. It creates grip at the front and allows the driver to place the car precisely into the corner. If the front does not respond properly, the driver may turn the steering wheel and feel the car hesitate. That hesitation changes everything. Imagine trying to open a door with a loose handle. The door still works. But every time you touch it, you are not completely certain it will respond. You become more careful. You use less force. You stop trusting the movement. For a Formula One driver, that hesitation costs time. And now Verstappen appeared to have uncertainty at both ends of the car. a front wing-related concern, a rear axle locking problem, and the earlier feeling that the entire car was being held back. But there was still another complaint. Verstappen said he felt as though he was lying down too much in the seat. At first, that may sound like a comfort issue. It is much more than that. A Formula One driver sits extremely low inside the car. His legs stretch forward. His shoulders are tightly supported. His body is fixed into a position designed for control, safety, and precision. The seat affects how the driver sees the track. It affects how he reaches the steering wheel. It affects how pressure travels through his back when he brakes. It even changes how connected he feels to the movement of the car. Move the seat slightly in an ordinary road car, and everything feels different. The pedals feel farther away. The steering wheel feels too close. Your view of the road changes. Now imagine trying to find thousandths of a second while feeling that the driving position itself is wrong. That is not a distraction Verstappen can simply ignore. It becomes part of every braking zone, every steering input, every correction. And this is where Red Bull's problem became much bigger than one bad setup choice. Verstappen was not reporting one isolated weakness. He was describing a collection of issues. The car felt restricted in the morning. There was a front wing-related concern in the afternoon. The rear axle was locking under braking. The seating position felt wrong. Each complaint sounded separate. Together, they pointed toward one deeper problem. Verstappen did not feel fully connected to the car. And that is something no lap time can hide forever. Red Bull could look at fourth place and say the car was competitive. The engineers could study the data and find sections where Verstappen matched the leaders. They could point to the small gap behind Norris and argue that the performance was already there. But none of those numbers could replace trust. Trust is what allows a driver to brake 5 meters later. Trust is what allows him to carry more speed into the corner. Trust is what allows him to correct a slide without hesitation. A Formula One driver does not have time to think through every movement. At the limit, the reaction must be automatic. The driver presses the brake. The rear stays stable. He turns the wheel. The front responds. He applies the throttle. The car accelerates. When that chain works, confidence grows. When one part fails, the driver begins questioning everything. And Verstappen's radio messages suggested that chain was breaking in several places. The most revealing connection was between the morning and afternoon. In first practice, the car felt like it had the handbrake on. In second practice, the rear axle was locking. Those were not identical symptoms. But both were connected to the same critical part of the lap. Braking, weight transfer, corner entry. When a Formula One car slows down, its weight moves toward the front. The front tires are pressed harder into the track, while the rear becomes lighter. The engineers must control that movement. If the balance is wrong, the driver can feel the car resisting in one corner and becoming unstable in another. Imagine carrying a tray filled with drinks while walking quickly. Move too slowly, and you lose time. Move too suddenly, and everything slides. The challenge is not simply speed. The challenge is controlling the movement while maintaining the speed. That may have been the deeper issue Verstappen was exposing. The car had performance, but it did not deliver that performance in a calm, predictable way. And that is one of the hardest problems for a team to solve. A clearly slow car gives the engineers an obvious target. They know they need more grip. They know they need better acceleration. They know they need more speed on the straight. But a car that is fast in some moments and unstable in others creates confusion. The engineers see potential. The driver feels danger. The data says the setup is close. The radio says it is not. Both sides can be correct. And that is where the tension begins.